The night my husband's secret came to our door, I was lighting candles for our 10th anniversary dinner and pretending the rain outside made our home feel warmer. That is the funny thing about beautiful houses. From the street, ours looked perfect, a white stone mansion tucked behind iron gates in Greenwich, Connecticut, with trimmed hedges, glowing windows, and a driveway long enough to make visitors slow down before they reached the front steps. Inside, the table was set for two. Crystal glasses. Cream linen napkins. Daniel's favorite roast chicken resting under foil. A small chocolate cake from the bakery where we had bought cupcakes the week he proposed. I had even worn the blue dress he loved, the one he always said made my eyes look softer. For 10 years I had been Mrs. Grace Whitmore, wife of Daniel Whitmore, the billionaire founder of Whitmore Holdings, the man magazines called brilliant, private, untouchable. But to me, he was still the man who left his phone outside the bedroom, warmed my coffee before I woke up, and kissed my forehead whenever he thought I was asleep. He was good to me. That was what made the secret hurt later. Not because he had never loved me, but because he had loved me while keeping one door in his heart locked. At 8:47 p.m. Daniel stood by the dining room window, watching the rain slide down the glass in silver lines. He should have looked relaxed. He had promised no calls, no board meetings, no emergency flights to Chicago. Just us. But his shoulders were stiff beneath his white dress shirt, and he kept checking the dark driveway like he was waiting for something he feared would find him. "Daniel," I said gently, "are you expecting someone?" He turned too quickly. No one word. Too fast. Too clean. I tried to smile it away. Marriage teaches you which silences to question and which ones to leave alone. For years I had left his alone. I never asked why the west hallway had a locked room no housekeeper entered. I never asked why the name Laura Bennett could drain all warmth from his face. I never asked why he hated his father with a quietness that felt older than anger. I told myself love meant patience. Maybe you have done that too. Maybe you have mistaken silence for trust because the truth felt impolite to touch. Then the doorbell rang. Once. Long and sharp. The sound cut through the house like a glass cracking in another room. Daniel did not move. The rain beat harder against the windows. I looked toward the foyer, confused, then back at him. His face had changed. Not surprised. Not annoyed. Afraid. "I'll get it," I whispered. "Grace, wait." But I was already walking. The marble floor felt cold beneath my heels. The chandelier above the entryway trembled faintly from the thunder rolling over the Long Island Sound. When I opened the door, the storm rushed in first, wet and wild, carrying the smell of pavement and pine. Then I saw her. A young woman stood on our porch, soaked from head to toe, her pale hair stuck to her cheeks, her hands wrapped around a small cardboard box pressed against her chest. She could not have been more than 22. Her coat was thin. Her lips trembled from the cold. But her eyes, blue and exhausted, stayed fixed past me, locked on the man standing in the hallway behind my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said, voice shaking. "I know it's late. I should have asked her name. I should have asked if she needed a phone, a towel, a ride somewhere safe." But before I could say anything, Daniel whispered one word behind me, so softly I almost missed it. "Ava." The girl flinched like hearing her name and his voice hurt. She lifted the box slightly, and water dripped from its torn corner onto our welcome mat. "My mother died yesterday," she said. "Before she passed, she told me to find Daniel Whitmore." My fingers tightened around the door handle. Daniel stepped forward, slow and pale, as if every foot between them weighed 100 pounds. The girl looked at me then, and I saw something worse than anger in her face. Hope. Desperate, unwanted hope. She said he was the only family I had left. Behind me, Daniel's wineglass slipped from his hand and shattered across the marble, red wine spreading at his feet like a secret that had finally stopped pretending to stay contained. Ava stood in the doorway as if she already knew she did not belong there, dripping rainwater onto a mat embroidered with our last name. Whitmore. I had seen that name carved into hospital wings, printed on charity invitations, spoken on business channels with a kind of polished respect that made Daniel seem less like a person and more like a monument. But in that moment, with broken glass at his feet and a trembling stranger on our porch, the name looked heavy. Too heavy for one man to carry without cracking. "Come inside," I said, because whatever was happening, she was freezing. Daniel turned toward me sharply. "Grace." There was warning in his voice, not anger, but fear wearing a suit. I ignored it. I stepped aside and Ava crossed the threshold with careful, uncertain steps, clutching that damp cardboard box like it was the last proof that her life had ever made sense. The foyer lights made her look younger. Not childish, just tired in a way no 22-year-old should be tired. Her beige coat was soaked through. Her shoes were muddy from the long walk up our driveway. I took a towel from the hall closet and wrapped it around her shoulders. She whispered, "Thank you." But her eyes never stopped searching Daniel's face. He had gone still near the staircase. That was Daniel's gift and his curse. In boardrooms, stillness made him powerful. At home, it made him unreachable. For 10 years, people told me I had married the perfect man. Daniel Whitmore remembered birthdays, sent flowers for no reason, donated millions without asking for applause, and never once raised his voice at me. He was tender in small ways that nobody saw. He noticed when I skipped lunch. He carried an extra pair of flats in the car after a gala left blisters on my heels. He could walk into a room of senators and executives, then come home and kneel on the kitchen floor to fix the loose hinge on my mother's old recipe box. That was the man I knew. That was the man I loved. But there had always been shadows around him, places even love could not light. The west hallway was one of them. At the end of it stood a white door with a brass lock, always polished, always shut. When I asked about it during our first year of marriage, Daniel kissed my hand and said, "Some memories are better left sleeping." I believed him because I wanted to. Another shadow had a name. Laura Bennett. I heard it only once at a winter fundraiser in Manhattan, when an older woman touched Daniel's sleeve and said, "I always wondered what happened with Laura." Daniel's face changed so completely that I felt the air leave the room. On the ride home, he told me she was someone from before, someone he failed, someone gone. Then he asked me not to bring her up again. So I did not. That is how secrets survive in good marriages. They do not always arrive as lies. Sometimes they come dressed as pain, and you leave them alone because you think that is kindness. I led Ava into the living room, where the fireplace still glowed and our anniversary dinner sat untouched beyond the archway. She placed the cardboard box on the coffee table with both hands. Daniel followed but stayed near the doorway, as if stepping closer would make the past real. "Your mother was Laura Bennett," I said softly. Ava nodded. She talked about him at the end. Not with hate. That almost made it worse. Daniel closed his eyes. "Ava, I did not know she had passed." "You did not know a lot of things," Ava replied, her voice quiet, not cruel. Then she opened the box and the first thing I saw was a tiny pair of white baby shoes, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Something inside me tightened. Ava lifted a torn photograph next. Half of it showed Laura, young and smiling in a cotton dress, standing in sunlight. The other half had been taped back on. Daniel was beside her, younger, softer, his arm around her shoulders, looking at her like the world had not yet taught him how to hide. I looked from the photo to my husband, waiting for him to explain why this girl knew the parts of him I had never been allowed to touch. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. And for the first time in 10 years, I wondered if the locked room was not the only door in our house that had been closed to me. Ava reached beneath the baby shoes and pulled out a folded letter sealed inside a plastic sleeve. The kind people use when they are trying to protect paper from time, rain, and regret. Her hand shook as she passed it to me instead of Daniel. That choice landed quietly between us. She did not trust him with it. Maybe she thought I would be more fair. Maybe she thought a wife deserved to read the words her husband had buried. I looked at Daniel, asking permission with my eyes even though some part of me knew permission no longer belonged to him. He nodded once, barely. The paper inside was soft at the creases, yellow at the edges, written in blue ink with the slanted, careful handwriting of a woman trying not to fall apart. "Dear Daniel," it began. "I have called your office 6 times, but they keep saying you are unavailable. I went to the apartment but the doorman said you moved out. Your father's lawyer told me you do not want contact, and maybe I should believe him, but I cannot. Not after what you said to me at the lake. Not after you promised you would come back before the baby was born." The room went so quiet I could hear the rain sliding down the chimney. My fingers tightened around the letter. Daniel stepped forward as if the words had pulled him by the chest. "I never saw that," he whispered. Ava laughed once, but it had no humor in it. That is what rich men always say, is it not? The letter got lost. The call never came through. The money was handled by someone else. Daniel flinched, and I hated that I noticed. I hated that even while my own heart was cracking, I still knew the difference between his guilt and his surprise. Let me finish, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I kept reading. If you truly believe the child is not yours, then look me in the eyes and say it. Do not let your father speak for you. Do not let your name become a wall I have to beg through. I am not asking for your fortune. I am asking you to remember who you were before everyone convinced you love was weakness. By the time I reached the signature Laura Bennett, my throat felt tight. Ava opened the box again and took out a tiny hospital bracelet, the plastic cloudy with age. The printed name had faded, but I could still make out Bennett, Ava, female. Under it was a date, almost exactly 10 years before Daniel and I met. Not after our marriage. Not during it. Before me. That should have made it easier. It did not. Because betrayal is not always about dates. Sometimes it is about standing in your own dining room in your anniversary dress and realizing your life has been built beside a graveyard of things nobody told you. Daniel ran a hand over his face. Laura and I were together when I was 28, he said. Before the company went public. Before all of this. He gestured vaguely toward the house, the crystal, the polished life surrounding us. She was not impressed by money. She hated my world, honestly. She said everyone around me spoke in numbers because they were afraid of feelings. For 1 second, his mouth almost smiled, and that hurt more than his silence. Then why did you leave her? I asked. He looked at the photograph on the table. Because my father showed me documents, medical records, messages, proof that she had been seeing someone else. Ava's eyes filled, but she did not cry. My mother worked 2 jobs until her hands swelled so badly she could not button her own coat. She kept your picture in a drawer. She never remarried. Does that sound like a woman running a con? No, Daniel said, and his voice broke on that single word. I watched him sink into the armchair across from us, suddenly not a billionaire. Not a man with his name on buildings, just a man realizing that the past had not stayed buried out of mercy. It had been buried by design. Still, there was one question I could not escape. It pressed against my ribs harder than jealousy, harder than fear. Daniel, I said, holding up the letter. If you believe she lied to you, why did you keep a locked room in our home? His face went pale again. Ava turned toward him too. For the first time, the girl and I wanted the same answer. Daniel looked toward the west hallway, where the closed door waited in the dark like it had been listening all along. Because, he whispered, part of me never believed she did. Daniel's answer seemed to change the temperature of the room. The fireplace was still burning, the candles still flickered in the dining room, and rain still tapped against every window. But I suddenly felt cold in a place I had always called home. Ava sat on the edge of the sofa with the towel around her shoulders, watching both of us like she was afraid one wrong breath would make us send her back into the storm. That was the moment I understood what kind of woman I wanted to be before I understood what kind of wife I could still be. I could have pointed to the door. I could have told myself Ava was not my problem, that she had arrived carrying another woman's ghost into my anniversary night, that she had no right to stand there with baby shoes and letters and questions sharp enough to cut through 10 years of marriage. But she looked so tired. Not dramatic. Not demanding. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from growing up with half a story and being told to stop asking for the rest. So I stood, walked to the kitchen, and poured soup into a bowl from the pot I had made for Daniel and me. My hands moved automatically. Spoon. Napkin. A glass of water. Normal things, ordinary things, because sometimes kindness is not a speech. Sometimes it is warm food placed in front of someone who has been bracing for rejection all night. Ava stared at the bowl when I set it on the coffee table. I did not come here for money, she said quickly. I know how this looks, but I do not want to check. Then eat, I said. You can explain what you want after you stop shivering. Her eyes softened, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked away from Daniel. Daniel stayed standing near the doorway, one hand in his pocket, the other pressed against the frame as if the house itself was holding him up. Grace, he said quietly, we can put her in a hotel. I will call James. He can drive her anywhere she wants. No, I said. He blinked. I almost never used that tone with him. It is midnight, there is a storm outside, and she just buried her mother. She is not going anywhere tonight. Ava's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Daniel looked wounded, but I did not apologize. A good man can still do cowardly things when the past knocks too loudly. I had loved Daniel long enough to know his instinct was not cruelty. It was containment. He wanted to move the problem somewhere clean, somewhere managed, somewhere with fresh sheets and a credit card on file. But people are not corporate crises. You cannot relocate grief and call it resolved. I turned back to Ava. Do you have a place to stay? She looked down. A motel in Stamford. Paid through tomorrow morning. Family. No one close. Friends. A roommate from college in Ohio, but I have not told her yet. Her voice thinned on the last word. Yet. Such a small word. Such a lonely one. Daniel closed his eyes, and I could see something inside him folding under the weight of it. Maybe he heard Laura in that sentence. Maybe he heard the child he thought he lost. Maybe he heard himself at 28, choosing pride because it looked stronger than pain. I told Ava she could sleep in the blue guest room upstairs, the one facing the garden. She looked startled, then suspicious, as if generosity always came with a hidden price. I understood that look. I had seen it on women at charity events when donors smiled too brightly. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked. The honest answer was complicated. Because you are cold. Because your mother is gone. Because if Daniel hurt you, I need to know. Because if he did not, then someone else did and you still deserve warmth. But I only said, because you knocked on my door in the rain. Her mouth trembled and she nodded once. I gathered the baby shoes, the bracelet, the photograph, and the letter, placing them carefully back into the box. When my fingers touched the taped edge of the picture, I felt Daniel watching me. Not as a husband watching his wife, but as a man watching the one person he feared might finally see all of him. "We will talk in the morning," I said. He stepped closer. "Grace, please." I looked at him, then really looked. The man I loved was still there. So was the man who had hidden a room from me for 10 years. "No," I said softly. "Tonight she gets rest. Tomorrow I get the truth." The house settled into a silence that did not feel peaceful anymore. Upstairs, Ava was behind the guest room door with a dry sweater, a warm blanket, and the little cardboard box resting on the nightstand beside her. Downstairs, the anniversary candles burned lower until the wax spilled over the silver holders in soft white tears. Daniel and I stood in the hallway without touching. Between us stretched 10 years of dinners, trips, quiet mornings, hospital visits, birthdays, ordinary Sundays, and every unanswered question I had mistaken for respect. "Show me the room," I said. Daniel looked toward the west hallway. In all our years together, I had never seen him look afraid of a door. "Grace, it is not what you think." I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. That sentence has never helped a wife feel better. He lowered his head. For a moment he was not the man who could move markets with one phone call. He was just my husband, barefoot on the marble, standing in a house too large for the truth. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass key. It was smaller than I expected, dull from years of use, with a faded blue ribbon tied through the top. My stomach tightened when I saw the ribbon. It matched the one around the baby shoes. Daniel noticed me staring. "Laura tied that there," he said. "Before everything." He walked down the west hallway slowly, each step measured, almost reverent. Family portraits lined the walls, Daniel beside governors, Daniel beside his father, Daniel cutting ribbons in front of glass towers. Not one picture of Laura. Not one picture of the young man from Ava's photograph, the one who looked like he still believed life could be simple. At the end of the hall, Daniel stopped before the white door. His hand hovered near the lock. "I kept it closed because I thought I was protecting our marriage," he said. "But I think I was only protecting my shame." The key turned with a soft click that seemed louder than thunder. The door opened. I had braced myself for perfume, photographs, love letters arranged like a shrine to another woman. I had expected betrayal to look romantic and unforgivable. It did not. The room was a nursery. A small white crib stood beneath the window, covered with a clean sheet though no child had ever slept there. A rocking chair sat in the corner. On the wall, pale cream paint had faded around framed sketches of stars and sailboats. A wooden music box rested on a dresser, its painted moon chipped at one edge. Beside it were stacks of envelopes, some sealed, some opened, all addressed in Daniel's handwriting to Laura Bennett. I stepped inside and felt my anger stumble. This was not a room of desire. This was a room of grief. Daniel stayed at the doorway as if he did not deserve to enter. After my father showed me the documents, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. It was easier than believing Laura would not answer me. Easier than fighting a man who controlled my trust before I knew what trust was. I walked to the dresser and touched one of the envelopes. The date was from our 2nd year of marriage. Then another from our 5th. Another from last Christmas. You wrote to her while you were married to me? My voice was quiet, but the room heard it. I never sent them, he said. I could not. I did not know whether I was apologizing to a woman who betrayed me or begging forgiveness from one I betrayed. I picked up the music box and turned the tiny key. A soft melody trembled out, uneven and fragile. Daniel closed his eyes. We bought that the week she told me she was pregnant. I painted this room before I knew whether the baby was real. Before I knew anything except that some part of me wanted to be better than my father. The melody slowed. I looked at the crib, the letters, the ribbon on the key, and suddenly the worst part was not that Daniel had loved someone before me. Of course he had. We all arrive in marriage carrying former versions of ourselves. The worst part was that he had built a locked room inside our home, and let me live around it like furniture. You let me sleep beside you for 10 years while this room existed, I said. You let me believe your silence was pain I had no right to touch. Daniel's eyes opened, wet and red. I was afraid if you knew, you would leave. I turned toward him. Daniel, secrets do not keep people from leaving. They only make sure we are alone while we stay. He pressed his hand against the doorframe, the same way he had downstairs, as if he needed something solid because he no longer trusted himself to stand. Then from upstairs came the faint sound of a door opening. Ava's footsteps paused at the top of the staircase. She must have heard the music box. Daniel and I both looked toward the hallway. The past was no longer locked away. It was awake, listening, and waiting to be invited in. Ava stood at the end of the hallway in one of my old sweaters, her damp hair brushed back from her face, her eyes fixed on the nursery as if she had walked into a dream that belonged to her and still did not want her. No one spoke for several seconds. The music box gave one final tired note and stopped. Daniel looked at her with a kind of pain I had never seen in him before, not the controlled grief he carried at funerals or the quiet exhaustion after hard business days, but something stripped bare and almost childlike. Your mother bought that, he said. Ava stepped into the room slowly. Her fingers brushed the edge of the crib, then the painted sailboats on the wall. She told me once that she wanted a room with boats, Ava whispered. She said boats meant you could leave, but they also meant you could come home. Daniel swallowed hard. I painted those myself. Ava turned toward him, and there was a question in her face that had waited 22 years to be asked. Then why did you not come home? The room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel looked at me first, maybe because he knew this answer would wound both of us. Because I was a coward, he said. Because my father told me a story that made my pride feel safer than my heart. The next morning came gray and washed clean, with rain still dripping from the gutters and the lawn shining like glass. None of us had slept much. At 7 a.m. I made coffee while Daniel called an independent lab in Stanford and requested a private DNA test for him and Ava. He did not hand it to an assistant. He did not ask a lawyer to soften it. He made the call himself, standing by the kitchen island with one hand wrapped around his mug and the other trembling around his phone. Ava sat across from me, wearing borrowed socks, staring at the steam rising from her tea. What happens if it says he is not my father? She asked. Daniel closed his eyes. I answered before he could. Then we keep looking for the truth. She looked up at me. Why? It was such a simple question, and somehow the saddest one she could have asked. Why would anyone keep helping after the easy explanation disappeared? Why would a wife help the woman who might prove her husband had a life hidden inside their marriage? Why would a stranger choose kindness when jealousy was sitting right there, ready to be used? I reached across the table and touched the corner of the cardboard box. Because your mother did not send you here to be dismissed. By noon we were at the lab. Then Daniel took us to Whitmore Holdings in Manhattan. Not through the front entrance where cameras waited, but through the private garage beneath the building. The tower rose 50 stories above Madison Avenue, all blue glass and cold confidence. I had been there many times for holiday parties and charity luncheons, but that day it felt different. Less like Daniel's kingdom, more like a place that knew how to hide things. In a records room behind the legal department, Daniel opened old files that had not been touched in years. Ava stood beside me while he searched. His company general counsel, Martin Hale, arrived with a tight smile and too many careful words. Daniel, this is delicate. Your father's office should be involved before anything is reviewed. Daniel did not look up. My father's office is exactly why I am reviewing it. Martin's smile faded. That was the first crack. The second came inside a banker's box labeled with Laura Bennett's name. There were copies of letters marked returned, though Laura's letter in Ava's box had clearly reached the Whitmore mailroom. There were wire transfer records Daniel had authorized for years, payments he believed had gone to Laura. But the account numbers led to a family trust controlled by his father's attorney. Ava leaned against the table, her face pale. My mother worked nights cleaning offices, she said. She thought he forgot us. Daniel stared at the files like they were written in a language made of shame. I did not forget. No, I said softly, and the words hurt to give him, but they were true. But someone made sure your remembering never reached her. Then Martin Hale made one mistake. He said, your father was protecting the family name. Daniel looked at him, and for the first time since Ava arrived, I saw something stronger than guilt rise in my husband. Not rage. Not cruelty. Resolve. No, he said. He was protecting himself. The DNA results came the following evening, delivered by encrypted email while the three of us sat in the nursery with the cardboard box between us. Daniel opened the message. His face changed before he spoke. Ava gripped the edge of the crib. I held my breath. Ava, Daniel said, voice almost gone. You are not my daughter. Her eyes closed and one tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Then Daniel read further. His hand flew to his mouth. But you are a Whitmore. I felt the room tilt. What does that mean? I asked. Daniel looked at Ava, devastated. It means my father was your father. Ava stepped back as if the truth itself had pushed her. The baby shoes sat on the dresser. The blue ribbon on the key hung motionless. And in that quiet nursery, the secret finally changed shape. It was no longer Daniel's possible child standing before us. It was his sister, abandoned by the same man who had taught him how to abandon his own heart. Ava did not cry loudly. She did something worse. She became very still, as if her whole life had just stepped away from her and left her body behind in the nursery. Daniel reached toward her, then stopped before touching her shoulder. He had learned, perhaps too late, that not every wound wanted comfort from the person standing closest to it. Ava, he said softly, I am so sorry. She looked at him with red eyes and a strange, tired calm. My mother died believing you left us. Daniel nodded, and the movement looked painful. I know. She died thinking I was unwanted by a man who was not even my father. Her voice broke only on the last word. And your father knew. No one answered because there was nothing gentle enough to say. The nursery, which only hours earlier had felt like a monument to Daniel's grief, now felt like evidence of a much larger cruelty. The crib, the sailboats, the unsent letters, the tiny shoes, all of it had been built around the wrong question. Daniel had spent 10 years asking whether he had lost a child. Ava had spent her entire life asking why a father never came. And I stood between them, understanding that my marriage had not been destroyed by another woman or another child, but by a family system that had taught silence like inheritance. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky pale and empty over Greenwich. Sunlight touched the wet driveway, but nothing inside our house felt brighter. Ava packed the cardboard box with careful hands. She said she needed air, space, somewhere that did not smell like old money and old secrets. Daniel offered a driver. She refused. I offered to go with her. She looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. You have been kinder to me than anyone had a right to be, she said. But I need to remember who I am without all of you for a minute. She walked out through the front door with the box against her chest, not as a stranger this time, but not yet as family. Daniel watched from the foyer until the gate closed behind her taxi. Then he turned to me with the face of a man who expected me to leave next. He was not wrong. I went upstairs, took a small suitcase from the closet, and began folding clothes. Daniel stood in the doorway of our bedroom, silent. The room around us was beautiful in a way that suddenly felt insulting. The cream carpet, the lake blue curtains, the framed wedding photo on the dresser where I was laughing and Daniel was looking at me as if I had saved him from something I did not yet know existed. "Grace," he said, "please do not go." I placed a sweater into the suitcase. "I am not leaving because of Ava. I know. I am not leaving because you loved Laura before me. I know." My hand stopped on the next piece of clothing. "I am leaving because you decided I could share your life, your home, your name, your bed, your future, but not your truth." Daniel flinched. I turned toward him then, and for the first time since the knock at the door, I let him see how much I hurt. "Do you know what it felt like to stand in that nursery and realize I had been walking past your grief for 10 years like a guest in my own marriage?" His eyes filled. "I thought I was sparing you." "No," I said gently, because I did not want to punish him with cruelty. I wanted him to hear me. "You were sparing yourself the risk of being fully known." That landed harder than shouting would have. He lowered his head, and I saw the billionaire disappear again, replaced by a boy raised by a father who treated emotion like a weakness to be removed. But understanding someone's wound does not mean you have to live inside the damage. I zipped the suitcase. "I am going to my old apartment in Rye for a few days." Daniel stepped forward. "Let me come with you." No, the word hurt both of us. "You need to decide what kind of man you are when I am not standing beside you making you feel forgiven." Downstairs, James waited with the car. As we drove away, I looked back once. Daniel stood on the front steps of the mansion, smaller than I had ever seen him, surrounded by stone columns, iron gates, and everything money could buy except peace. That afternoon he came to the apartment anyway. I heard his knock, soft and careful, so different from Ava's desperate one the night before. I stood on the other side of the door with my hand over my heart. "Grace," he said through the wood, "I will fix this." I closed my eyes. "Do not fix it for me, Daniel." Silence. Then I said the truth I had carried since the nursery. "You spent 10 years protecting me from your pain. But all you did was leave me outside it." He did not answer. I heard his breath catch, then his footsteps retreat down the hall. For the first time I did not run after him. Some doors cannot be opened with a key. Some doors only open when the person on the other side finally stops hiding. For 2 days, Daniel did not call me with excuses. He did not send flowers, did not send a car, did not ask his assistant to deliver some careful apology wrapped in expensive paper. That silence felt different from the old silence. The old silence had been a locked door. This one felt like a man finally standing inside the room he had built and looking at every wall. On the 3rd morning, I saw him on the news. I had made tea in my small apartment in Rye, the one I kept after my mother passed because I could never quite let go of the life I had before marble floors and charity galas. The television was on low, more for company than attention, until Daniel's face appeared above the words Whitmore Holdings Emergency Board Meeting. He stood outside the Manhattan Tower in a navy suit, but he looked nothing like the polished billionaire the cameras loved. His eyes were tired. His jaw was unshaven. In his hands he carried Ava's cardboard box. I set my mug down before I dropped it. Reporters shouted questions as he walked through the lobby, but he did not answer them. He went straight upstairs to the 50th floor boardroom, where the men and women who had built careers around the Whitmore name were waiting behind glass walls and polished walnut. I learned later that Daniel's father was already there, sitting at the head of the table like history had reserved the chair for him. Charles Whitmore was 81, silver-haired, elegant, and cold in the way old money can be cold, not loud, not messy, just certain that everyone has a price and every truth has a lock. Martin Hale sat beside him with a folder of prepared statements. Daniel placed the cardboard box in the center of the table. Nobody touched it. "This meeting is private," Charles said. Daniel looked at him. "Not anymore." Then he turned on the conference room camera himself. The live feed went first to the board, then to the company's internal channel, then within minutes to every major business outlet watching the chaos unfold. I stood frozen in my apartment while the man who had hidden from one truth for 10 years chose to reveal all of it in front of the world. He spoke calmly. No dramatics. No blame dressed as bravery. He said Laura Bennett's name. He said Ava's name. He said documents had been falsified, letters had been intercepted, and money meant for a struggling woman had been redirected into a trust controlled by his father's attorney. Charles interrupted once, voice sharp with embarrassment. You are destroying this family. Daniel looked at the cardboard box, then at him. No. You confused the family with the reputation. The room went silent. Daniel opened the box and took out the baby shoes tied with the faded blue ribbon. He held them gently, almost tenderly, as if Ava's whole childhood had become small enough to fit in his hands. For years I believed silence protected people, he said. I believed power meant controlling the story. I was wrong. Power without truth is just fear with better furniture. My hand went to my mouth. I had never heard him speak like that, not as a chief executive officer, not as a husband asking forgiveness, but as a man cutting the chain that had been handed to him. He announced that Charles Whitmore would be removed from all advisory roles pending an independent investigation. Martin Hale resigned before the meeting ended. Daniel stepped down temporarily as chief executive officer and appointed an outside ethics committee with full access to family-controlled records. Then he did something no public relations team would have advised. He asked Ava Bennett, his newly confirmed half-sister, to come in. She entered through the side door wearing a simple black coat, her face pale but steady. Daniel did not hug her. He did not perform tenderness for the cameras. He simply pulled out a chair beside him and said, You do not have to forgive me. You do not have to trust this family. But you will never be hidden by it again. Ava sat down slowly. For a moment she looked like the girl on my porch in the rain. Then she lifted her chin, and I saw Laura's courage in a daughter Laura had raised alone. Daniel announced the Laura Bennett Foundation that afternoon, not as a donation to polish the Whitmore name, but as a legally independent fund for women and families silenced by money, pressure, or fear. He seeded it with $50 million of his personal shares and gave Ava a permanent seat on the board if she wanted it. The reporters called it a corporate earthquake. Analysts called it reputational damage. But watching from my little apartment, with tears cooling on my face, I knew what it really was. It was not Daniel fixing everything. Some things cannot be fixed in one speech, one fund, or one public act. It was Daniel finally choosing the truth when lying would have been easier, cheaper, and safer. That evening a package arrived at my door. No flowers, no jewelry, just the brass key with the faded blue ribbon, and a note in Daniel's handwriting. Grace, I am not asking you to come home. I am only giving you the last door I should have opened years ago. A year later, the west hallway no longer felt like a place the house was holding its breath around. The white door stayed open now. The brass key with the faded blue ribbon hung on a small hook beside it, not hidden in Daniel's pocket, not buried in a drawer, not guarded like a secret too dangerous to touch. The nursery was not a nursery anymore. Daniel and Ava had changed it together slowly, one Saturday at a time, while I came and went at my own pace, never rushed, never pressured, never asked to pretend healing had a deadline. The crib was gone. The rocking chair stayed. The sailboats remained on the wall because Ava said her mother would have liked that. The dresser now held framed photographs. Laura smiling in sunlight, Ava on the day the foundation opened its first family support center in New Haven, Daniel and me standing a careful distance apart at the ribbon cutting, still bruised but still there. The room became a family room, not the kind with perfect pillows and staged laughter, but the kind where people could sit with coffee and say difficult things without anyone leaving the truth outside the door. Daniel and I did not rebuild quickly. That would have been easier to describe and harder to believe. Trust did not return because he made one speech, gave away shares, or exposed his father's lies. Trust returned in smaller ways. He told me when he was scared instead of becoming quiet. He answered questions even when the answers made him look weak. He stopped treating pain like a private inheritance. Some nights I still slept at my apartment in Rye. Some mornings I woke up back in our bedroom in Greenwich and found Daniel downstairs making coffee, leaving space beside him without demanding I fill it. Love, I learned, is not proven by never breaking. Sometimes it is proven by what people do after the break, when no applause is left and forgiveness has to be practiced in ordinary rooms. Ava became part of our Sundays before any of us knew what to call it. At first she came for paperwork, foundation meetings, signatures, legal updates. Then she stayed for soup. Then for dessert. Then she started bringing grocery store flowers because she said the mansion looked too expensive and not alive enough. She never called Daniel her brother right away. She called him Daniel carefully, like the name had edges. He accepted that. He earned what came next by not reaching for it too soon. On the evening of our 11th anniversary, rain returned to Greenwich, soft at first, then steady against the windows. I was in the kitchen frosting a lopsided chocolate cake, the same kind from the bakery where everything had begun to unravel. Daniel came in carrying 2 plates and stopped when he saw me looking toward the hallway. "Are you thinking about last year?" he asked. I nodded. He set the plates down. "Me too." There was no panic in his face now, only honesty. He reached into his pocket and placed the brass key on the counter between us. "I kept this because I was afraid of what it opened," he said. "Now I want you to keep it because there is nothing in this house I want closed to you." I touched the ribbon, faded but still holding. "Doors are not the only things that lock, Daniel." "I know," he said. "That is why I am not asking you to forget. I am asking to keep opening them with you." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. We both froze for half a second, then looked at each other and almost smiled. The sound no longer cut through the house like fear. It sounded like life arriving, wet shoes and all. Daniel stepped back from the counter. "You open it this time." I walked through the foyer, past the place where a wineglass had shattered a year before, past the mat with our last name on it, and opened the door. Ava stood on the porch under a yellow umbrella, rain sparkling on her shoulders, holding a small bakery box tied with string. "I know I am early," she said, "but the cake looked lonely, and I thought maybe my sister could use backup." My sister. 2 simple words, and somehow the house changed shape around them. I looked back at Daniel. His eyes were wet, but he did not look away. He had stopped hiding from tenderness. I let Ava in, and this time there was no storm following her, only the smell of rain, chocolate, and something close to home. We ate dinner in the old nursery with the sailboats on the wall and Laura's photograph on the shelf. No one pretended the past had not hurt. No one acted as if money had saved us. Money had built the mansion, paid the lawyers, opened the foundation, and filled rooms with beautiful things. But truth was what finally gave us a family. Home is not the place where nothing is broken. Home is where people stop hiding the broken pieces, lay them gently in the light, and choose day after day to stay honest enough to heal.